Hey everybody, I'm Em. I am one of the owners of the Fleapit community movie theater, and I'm really sorry about the way that I'm coming across, guys. I quit caffeine. I have been addicted for a long time. It's the only thing that gets me through these boring movies like Morbius, but for my health, I decided to quit. I just feel so terrible, and I can barely talk. But you know what's really sweet? Q has been so supportive. You know, he even made me a cup of coffee to make sure that my willpower was strong. But man, I don't know how I'm gonna get through this review for you guys, for our community outreach. Oh. I can't take it anymore. I don't care about the caffeine. You guys don't like me when I don't have my caffeine.
Wow, I feel so much better. Oh my goodness. Like I said, you do not like me when I do not have my coffee. Am I right? Am I? Oh, hey, look, I'm all tan now. Okay, cool. So now that I feel better, I think it might be appropriate for me to say that as today's community outreach video, we are reviewing the film Morbius, starring Jared Leto and other people, because wow.
Michael, what have you done?
I was trying to help people. I have powers that can only be described as superhuman. But there's a cost.
All our lives we've lived with death. Why shouldn't they know what it feels like for a change? Just accept who you are.
The bad guy.
Morbius. A new Marvel legend arrives exclusively in movie theaters April 1st.
Okay, so real quick, let me just tell you, if I call this Mosbius or Morpheus, just go with it. Mosbius is, if you know, you know. It's from How I Met Your Mother. And first thing I thought of when I heard Morbius was Mosbius. And honestly, I can't like pull the two apart from one another now. And then Morpheus, just cause duh. And then once I have all those three names kind of running around in my brain, it's very difficult to say Morbius. So Morbius came out on Friday. We showed the film on Friday, and it was originally supposed to premiere in July of 2020. They actually finished filming it, I think in like December of 2019 or the end of 2019. So this film has been like sitting and chilling for a while. So we were already kind of like, oh, this movie, interesting. And then it was pushed to January of this year, which made us very nervous because if you know anything about movies coming out in January, normally January is the month where studios will kind of dump the movies they don't know what to do with. So then it was announced that this film was moved from January of this year to the beginning of April this year, which we were surprised about, but we were kind of interested in. We were sad because it left a really big content drought. I guess we could have used that for Oscar winners, but we just ended up playing video games on the big screen. I can't even beat one boss in Elden Ring. So anyway, Morbius was moved to April, and we played it, and there is a lot to say about this movie. This was directed by Daniel Espinoza. He also directed the 2017 movie Life that starred Ryan Reynolds and Jake Gyllenhaal and is allegedly about a space germ that kills everything. I have not seen that movie. I missed that one. So the people in this film, of course, Jared Leto is starring in it, obviously. And then Matt Smith is in this as Jared Leto's friend, Milo, but not actually Milo, and then Adria Arjona as Martine, who I might be referring to as Lady Doctor throughout this because unfortunately, she's not given a lot to do other than be a lady doctor. For a quick review before we get into spoilers, I didn't like this movie all that much. There are elements of it that are kind of fun, but there are parts that are just confusing and a little bit boring and very like, I don't care about what is going on. Some of the atmosphere is interesting, but the tone, you can't ever really pin down the exact tone that it's going for. And all of the characters are just very, very flat. And I feel like the interesting things about the film, they don't push those. They don't take those up a few notches. So really, at the end of the day, this movie can't hurt you. If you're really into Marvel, sure, go see it, as I'm sure you will. Come to the Flea Pit and see it, please support us. But if you're not a huge Marvel fan, but you just want to know what people are talking about, watch it on 2x speed when you watch it, however you watch it, or skip through and like watch in 10-second increments, like skip forward 10 seconds, watch a little bit, skip forward, and you'll basically get the gist. So really, the film is pretty boring. It's kind of stupid. There's not a lot of logic and consistency in this film, and it feels like there is a lot of stuff that they try to change after filming. So with that being said, let's get into the rest of the review. That is definitely going to be very spoiler heavy, although you should not care.
You know, we go on a journey, on a ride, on an adventure with him as he tries to uncover the secrets.
So this movie starts out confusing. It starts out with this scene of like Jared Leto in Costa Rica, Jared Leto aka Morbius. So this helicopter comes into this big gorge that has a big cave in it, and Jared Leto is like, yes, but he sees this corpse of like a cow on the ground, and one of the local guides who he's with is like, yeah, these bats can take down an animal 50 times their size. And Jared Leto's like, okay. And Jared Leto, knowing that information and knowing that these people are scared of the bats, he like goes up to the cave, puts what looks like a trap in front of the cave mouth, and then he cuts his hand and like holds it up as in like, here's my blood, take my blood. And then all the bats swarm him and like fly out of the cave. And I was thinking like, okay, well, he put this thing in front of the cave to capture the bats. But the bats just fly through it. So it's like, is it a light? Why is he there? And then the bats go out and all by the helicopter. And if these bats are dangerous and these men are very afraid of them, Jared Leto is like putting them in danger if these bats can indeed take down something 50 times their size or whatever. So it's just not clear from the get-go, like why he is where he is, why he's doing what he's doing, and what reasoning he has for any of it. Then it doesn't even get any more clear because the next scene is a time jump 25 years into the past, which is fine. I think I understand why they did it that way, but we go back and see Jared Leto and the kid who will eventually become Matt Smith, Milo. Morbius and Milo are little boys, and they are living at this facility in Europe for children with a rare blood disease, and they're being taken care of by Dr. Emil Nicholas, who is played by Jared Harris, who was in Chernobyl and Mad Men and a bunch of other things. But I like, it's very hard for me to remember who he is because he has a teeny tiny part, and you'll see him at the beginning and then you will forget he was ever in the movie until he dies. So when we start this section, we just see Morbius in the hospital, and then Milo comes in the hospital. He's the new kid, and he has a different name. His name is Michael, and he's like, hey, my name is Michael. And Morbius is like, no, you're Milo, because all the other kids who were here before you were named Milo. And then the little kid is like, oh, like, I mean, that's a mean thing to say, right? Well, it doesn't matter, because the next scene, they are best friends, and there was never like any enmity between them. And you never see the Morbius kid be like sassy and like have a axe to grind, or be like, I'm not giving you a name because all you chumps keep coming and going and dying. Like, it's not clear why he said that mean thing to Michael, and then literally there's a little montage and they're friends. This is an opportunity to create a lot of characterization and see like, okay, these are the characters as kids. What are they going to be like when they become adults? How are they going to evolve? And the story just does not do it. And then one day, Milo, who he's referred to as Milo for the rest of the film, even though Morbius called him Milo as like an insult, he just takes on the name. Like, and there's never a moment where it's like, I like Milo, that's a sweet name. It's never like that. It's just like, he is Milo now. But one day, Milo is chilling in bed next to Morbius, and they have to get like blood transfusions a couple times a day. So Milo's getting his, and Morbius is getting his, and then the machine for Milo stops working. And Morbius is like, oh my gosh, I gotta save my friend. So he opens the little box that handles the blood transfusion. I'm gonna tell you what happens in the scene, and then I'll tell you what we're supposed to think of the scene. So Morbius, he takes open the box that does the blood transfusion, and he like does something with a little wire and like a pen that makes it so the machine starts to work again. Morbius is like, I saved my friend. And the way that it comes across is like Morbius does this a lot. Like, he's familiar with these machines, or he's had to do this a few different times for maybe his own or for someone else's, I don't know. But then we cut to a moment where he's with the doctor, Dr. Nicholas, and Dr. Nicholas is like, you fixed this machine with a ballpoint pen. And Morbius is like, yeah? But it looked so normal in the previous scene. There was nothing about the way that scene was shot that would indicate to you, the viewer, that this was special, or that he was thinking and reasoning through what he was doing. You just see him have a problem, and then he like, fixes it. But if the film was really trying to build some tension in you and show that this character is very smart and very clever, in my opinion, they should have done some quicker cuts. They should have shown his face. They should have shown moments of deliberation of, what do I do? Okay, this is a battery, this is a spring, this is this. Okay, I know how all these things work, let me put it together, let me fix it. And then he does, and it's like, oh, okay, this kid is smart. But instead, no, he just fixes it, and then we're told that he's smart in the next scene. And that is not compelling dramatically. But anyway, it does move the plot along, because Dr. Nicholas is like, you're so smart, Morbius, that we're going to send you to New York City and you're gonna go to school. So little Morbius goes to school in New York City, and then we have another time jump to the present day. So when we jump into the future, Jared Leto's old, and we meet him receiving a Nobel Prize for his invention of artificial blood. It looks very similar to blue milk. He wins a Nobel Prize for it, and he seems kind of happy. He's being introduced by Dr. Nicholas, but then we cut, and he's in the hospital where he works and is a researcher, and he's sitting at the bedside of this little girl who he's taking care of, and we're to presume she has the same blood disease as he does, and he's like, I didn't accept it. And then this other nurse comes in, Martine, lady doctor. She comes in and she's like, yeah, you put our funding in jeopardy because to like stick it to the society or whatever. And I don't know, it's just not very clear as to why he rejected it, but then she takes him aside and she is like, you should have taken it, we should have gotten funding, you need funding for these tests you're doing. Like, I know the secret test you're doing. And Jared Leto's like, oh my gosh, how do you know what I'm doing? And she's like, I'm smart, duh, we literally work together. And so he takes her into his secret office that is literally almost all windows. Don't know how you could miss that. And then like towards the back of the big laboratory, there's this giant wind tunnel, like wind tunnel tube where you might have an aquarium for fish in an office. It's a tube and it has flying bats in it. And I would like to say that I am someone who likes bats. I'm very into nature conservation. I'm very hip to animals and creatures and how they need to be treated. And Jared Leto is keeping these bats in a wind tunnel where they can never stop flying around, or at least you never see them stop flying. And bats don't like to fly a lot. They have a very consistent cycle of when they want to fly around and when they want to hang upside down and do their thing. And he is just being so inhumane to these bats, who he's like, oh, I love these bats, I feel a connection to them. And he keeps them in a wind tunnel all day long. And that really bugged me because yes, it looked interesting in the office, but you could have done it in such a more interesting way that would have been consistent with his character. So, Lady Doctor and Jared Leto go into the office. We see the wind tunnel. And Jared Leto is like, I've been splicing together human DNA with bat DNA because bats, like vampire bats, have this anticoagulant property, which is apparently relevant to his blood disease, and it could cure it. So he's like, I'm splicing the DNA together. So he gives the DNA mixture serum, as they end up calling it, which everything's a serum. Like everything ends up being a serum in the end, but whatever. So he gives the serum to the mouse, and the mouse presumably dies. Like it literally keels over dead. And Lady Doctor is like, you lose your license for this. And I was watching it, I was like, I think though this is not the worst thing that's been made in the lab. The worst thing made in the lab is the KFC Double Down. So like, don't give yourself that much credit, girlfriend. Anyway, mouse dies. But then they get an emergency call. They have to go out of the secret lab, and Jared Leto is helping the little girl he was talking to earlier. She's like coding or something. And then they stabilize her, and the Lady Doctor looks over and sees that because apparently you can see into the secret lab from everywhere else in the hospital. Lady Doctor sees the mouse and is like, oh my gosh, he's alive. And apparently it worked, but something dies before it reanimates, which is very relevant to me because I'm rewatching Walking Dead and I'm like, I'm very familiar with reanimation. They basically make a plan to go do it to Jared Leto, I guess in international waters. We have a scene then with Milo and Morbius, and you see that Milo is apparently very wealthy, and you're like, oh, this is kind of interesting. Like, why is he wealthy? Never explained, never talked about. But the way that he is presented, it's like there needs to be a moment where that's explained because it could just be interesting. Like, it could be interesting. You see a guy who's like super duper rich, and I mean, he seems to be very relevant to like this comic book world. Why don't you have him say like, oh, I made all my money, or my parents made all my money? Because if his parents made all of his money, then that gives you a little more idea of who he is. He's like using his trust fund. Or if he made all of his money, then you get the idea of like, okay, well, despite the odds, like he's really made a name for himself. You get my point. Anyway, so Milo is alive and rich, and Jared Leto is like, I'm gonna help you, but Milo is like, I can't do this for much longer. And they have a scene where they're like sitting on a park bench together, and it looks like a scene out of a movie about like AIDS patients. And it's very striking, like it's odd compared to the rest of the movie, and I was like, please don't do that in this movie. Like, if you're making an allegory for AIDS, like, this is not the movie. I got really nervous for a second, but that was the only time I got nervous about AIDS. So basically, you get the idea that like Milo is having it really tough. He's in pain all the time. The disease is not going well for him. And he also tells Morbius that he's really into Lady Doctor. He thinks she's a sexy, tall drink of water. So cut to Jared Leto and Lady Doctor on a cargo ship to perform the test because international waters, I guess. Jared Leto uses the serum and it seems to be going okay. He doesn't die like the mouse died earlier. He just disappears when this really rude dock worker comes down and is like, "Nurse, what are you doing down here? When are you gonna be done?" And she's like, "Actually, I'm a doctor and I don't know." And then they turn and Morbius is gone. And then there's this scene that's not very scary where he's like a Batman, not Batman, but a Batman. And he's like, blah, 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 and he's screaming, and then he breaks out of the glass and he like kills people. And it's literally not scary at all. So yeah, Jared Leto doesn't die. He just turns into a vampire superhero and kills everyone on the boat. And then he wakes up and he's very tan and he's very ripped when he wakes up. And he looks like how he did in Fight Club, except this time he actually won the fight. But this causes a big stink. So next we introduce these two cops who are investigating the murders on the ship, and they are not given a lot to do, and they are not given a lot of personality. And the personality they tried to have, it was not working for me. They could have been two really fun, like interesting foils, kind of expecting Gary Oldman from the Christopher Nolan Batmans. Like, he's a good guy and he wants to do his work, but he is kind of funny and he's wise and he knows what he's talking about. He's really genuine, but these guys were just like, let me pull out of a grab bag like things about policemen and this is going to be the policeman in my movie. They were just very boring. They had nothing to do. Anyway, they question Lady Doctor and they call her a nurse. But unlike the time where she corrected the guy in the cargo ship, she does not correct the two police officers. They call her nurse and she's like, she doesn't even react to it. So the cops question her, it basically doesn't matter. And then we cut to Jared Leto and he's performing tests on himself. Like, he's trying to see how long he can go between meals of fake blood. He's drinking only the fake blood, not real blood, because he like went all crazy when he drank the real blood on the cargo ship. So to be ethical, I guess he's drinking the fake blue blood, the blue milk. And he realizes that the window between his meals is shrinking a lot on the blue blood, and he's like, oh no, at one point I'm gonna have to drink human blood, and he doesn't want that to happen. And then he locks himself in a room. He locks himself into like this glass observatory room in the lab, and it's not clear why he did it, and he doesn't have any blood in there with him, and it seems like he's timing something, but it's not super clear what he's timing, because it seemed like he did the test that he's trying to do earlier, like when he was just in his normal lab, and he almost goes back to his old self of like he has the bad blood disease. But then I guess like Matt Smith comes in for some reason. It is like, I'm saving you, I got you, oh my gosh, you're tan and ripped, like you're better, you found a cure, give the cure to me. And Jared Leto's like, no, it's a curse, not a cure. And Matt Smith is like, but you're so tanned and toned, please. And Jared Leto's like, no. And so Matt Smith leaves and he's mad. And then a nurse in the hospital dies. She's killed by a vampire. And it's like one of the only scenes that has any sort of tension in it. I have seen this in a couple movies before. If you've watched a lot of horror movies, you've probably seen something like this happen. I don't think it's like reinventing the wheel over here, but it's where you have like a really long hallway and lights keep flickering or lights are like coming on and off. And in this case, a nurse was walking down the hallway and like the light would come on as she walked under it, which I've never seen in my life personally, but that could be like a hospital thing to save power. I don't know, doesn't matter. And she's like walking and then she hears something and then she turns around and the camera cuts to see what she's seeing down the hallway. And you very clearly see a big giant blob, black blob, move from a door to the ceiling and onto the wall before the light goes out. And then it cuts back to the nurse and she's just like, and she like turns around and just keeps walking normally as if she just saw like a shadow and like squinted her eyes and was like, oh, it must be nothing. But then she's walking down the hallway and the music is getting louder. There are more musical stings and she's like huffing and puffing and she starts running. And then of course she dies, like something bites her and she dies after she turns on the light. But this is kind of the thing that happens a bunch in the movie. Basically, like, you see something happen and then you cut back to a character supposed to be reacting to it, and they don't, or their reaction is very delayed, and that doesn't really do a lot to like create tension in the edit. I'm not the world's best editor, but like, it was just very weird, and it felt like they didn't really know the shots they needed, or they had these shots and they were like, well, we have to do something with them. So anyway, this nurse dies, and then Jared Leto wakes up and he thinks he killed her. So he leaves the hospital and he takes a bunch of blue blood with him, and then the cops are like, hey, we gotta talk to you. And he's like, no. And so he flies, because he can fly. Cool. He flies like up this tunnel and onto the roof, and then he drops his book bag for no reason. He drops the book bag with the blue blood, and then he tries to leave the roof, and he can't for some reason. And it's been established before in the film where he can like ride wind waves, but when he's trying to get off the building, it didn't feel like that. It felt like almost what you would expect this movie to do if he needed to be like invited somewhere. So you know that whole thing with vampires, like you have to invite them into the building for them to come in. It was shot in that way. Like the building was not letting him leave. And then the cops come up and they're like, we're arresting you, and then it's never addressed again. Like, he can fly anywhere he wants after that point. So anyway, he's arrested, and Matt Smith visits him in prison, and then he can tell that Matt Smith took the cure. And then Matt Smith says, you figure out he's the one who killed the nurse in the hospital, and he's like going and killing a bunch of people because he's like, I feel so alive. And he just goes around and murders a bunch of people. But people think it's Dr. Morbius because he had connections to the cargo ship, and of course, like, okay, is it a copycat or is it Jared Leto? You know what I mean? So Jared Leto escapes from prison after finding out that Matt Smith took the serum. And I will say, like, the way that this sequence is shot of Jared Leto finding out about Matt Smith taking the serum, it is interesting. I think the film handled that very well. You basically see Jared Leto in the prison cell, and then it cuts to Matt Smith, and he's kind of like limping away from the prison cell, but as he gets farther away, you see him kind of stand up, and like he starts to walk normal, and he starts smiling in that, like, you know, smirky way of like, I totally pulled one over on Jared Leto. But then you cut back to Jared Leto in his cell, and Matt Smith left his cane there. And it's like, oh, well, he left his cane. Wouldn't he be worried about his cane? And right now, as I'm saying this, I'm like, was the movie trying to say that he left it there on purpose so Jared Leto would know that he took the serum? Which doesn't make any sense, because as Matt Smith, why would you want Jared Leto to know? Because Jared Leto, after finding out, very easily and very quickly breaks out of prison. Jared Leto just bangs on the glass and he like gets out of prison immediately. The wall shatters, and it's kind of like, well, Matt Smith should have known that. Like, isn't he privy to the super strength you have as a supernatural vampire buff mutant X-Man? Because Matt Smith literally has the exact same powers as Jared Leto does. Thinking about it more, it really just felt like, well, we need Jared Leto to know that Matt Smith is also a serum man. How are we gonna figure that out? Matt Smith leaves his cane in the room. Why would he do that? To prove a point. So Jared Leto finds Lady Doctor, and they actually have a really nice moment in a diner where you can tell they have some really good chemistry together. And every time I got a scene with the two of them, I was like, okay, I'm kind of watching a movie. I'm watching these two people have a relationship. I'm learning more about them. They seem interesting. They seem like they genuinely like each other and care for each other. And that was interesting to me. And then the scene was immediately ruined because Jared Leto goes to like touch a coffee mug, like her coffee mug, and he like goes to touch it, and then he can't touch it, and she like gives him a look, and he's like, I'm not that kind of vampire. It's presented in a way to where what he is doing or what he's not doing by doing what he's doing is like a trope that people have about vampires, but it doesn't make any sense. What coffee, like what? Vampires don't, they're nothing to do with coffee mugs or like hot liquid. It was a weird moment that was not given enough, like, it just felt like it wasn't given enough thought. Or maybe I totally missed something. Maybe it's like a thing in other countries that they believe about vampires. I do not know. But anyway, they're in the diner so that Jared Leto can overhear these kids who have counterfeit bills talk about their counterfeit bills. And then Jared Leto follows them to a lab and he beats them up, and so he makes that his secret lab. And then he creates a cure for the bulked up vampire syndrome in like 2 hours. And then at some point he makes out with the lady doctor, and it's sweet. It's like, okay, cool, they got together, like great. They obviously liked each other. They had some chemistry, very cool. Dr. Nicholas shows up again, good for him. He shows up and he's like, Matt Smith, you can't do this. And Matt Smith is like, yes, I can, and he kills Dr. Nicholas. And then Matt Smith kills, so Matt Smith kills Dr. Nicholas, and then he kidnaps the lady doctor, and he almost kills her. And I guess at this point, we're like basically at the finale of the film. And when I kind of I'm doing this in like a bullet list, but that's honestly how it kind of feels when you're watching the movie. It's like, okay, this happens. This happens. When it gets to the end, it's just kind of like, okay, like stuff is happening. We have to have a movie, so stuff is happening. Matt Smith wants a friend. They never got to like go out and live their lives. So Matt Smith wants a friend. He thinks that being like a bad boy with his friend Morbius is going to just like do the trick for him. So Matt Smith kidnaps the lady doctor, and Jared Leto uses his echolocation powers, which he has. And he finds the lady doctor, and she's almost dead. She's like, you're getting weak, you have to drink human blood, drink my blood, and like power up so that you can go kill Matt Smith. So Jared Leto has to power up, and the lady doctor, like, they kiss. They have like a final smooch. Oh. And then the lady doctor, this is what's supposed to happen. So the lady doctor, they kiss, she bites her lip. So he tastes her blood, and he is overcome with the urge to drink her blood, which is what happens. But the way that it's shot very awkwardly. And Q and I, when we were watching it, we were very confused. And when we were talking later, we were like, we thought that she bit him and drew his blood because that's how it was shot. It was very awkward, and of course logically she wants him to drink from her, she's gonna bite her own lip, but it was odd. It was just very odd. So yeah, Jared Leto, he drinks her blood and he bosses up, and he and Matt Smith have a very ugly fight down a skyscraper. It just looks like a lot of shrapnel and debris when you're watching it, and like clouds of particles. And then they burst down into like a subway construction zone, like a big atrium, and Jared Leto summons bats, and they pin down Matt Smith, and he goes over to Matt Smith. He like Pulp Fictions Matt Smith right in the chest. He gives that thing to him, like Uma Thurman in Pulp Fiction. Oh, and Matt Smith dies. So rest in peace. And you're like, great, movie's almost over. Whew. So Jared Leto flies out of the sewer, and the movie ends. The doctor lady wakes up. So the mouse, he gives the cure for the blood disease to the mouse way early on, and the mouse dies and then reanimates. And that doesn't happen to Jared Leto in the film, but to the lady doctor, he drinks her blood and we see her wake up. And to me, it's implied she's a vampire now, which I'm like, okay, sure, lady vampire. Like, double teaming vampire duo, kind of cool. But yeah, Jared Leto just like flies away. I'm assuming he like starts a band. Maybe he becomes a method actor. Maybe he disses Taylor Swift and outs himself as a fan of Charlie XCX. And then he just continues to enjoy like a successful career, even though everyone thinks he's a massive weirdo.
The secrets.
So Jared Leto flies away, and it has the like directed by Sting, starring blah, blah, blah. And then it cuts to a scene of, you know, in Spider-Man, the multiverse opens. It cuts to that happening over New York, and then we cut to Michael Keaton, Vulture, in a prison cell, and apparently he just appeared in the prison cell in this universe, and they let him out of prison because he wasn't supposed to be there, and he's like just hanging out. And then we have a few more credits, and then there's a scene of the Vulture flying up to this hill, and Jared Leto is there, and Jared Leto is like, I think that we could help each other, which is weird because Morbius is set up as a good guy and Vulture is clearly a bad guy, so why are they helping each other? Like, did the movie then decide that Morbius was going to be a villain? I don't know. Or like, is he a complicated dude? I just didn't see him really wrestle enough with the morality of what he is doing or what he could be in this film to make the ending make a lot of sense, like where his character is going. I covered a lot of the stupid things that happened in this film already, but there were a lot of just things that I am calling stupid things because they are stupid things. So the big one, this is more of a disappointing thing that does end up hurting the film. You never see him discover his powers, and I know that having superhero origin stories that like really focus on the character figuring out what their powers do, we've gotten a lot of those. But in this film, Morbius is, to someone like me, who is a very casual comic book consumer, really comic book movie consumer, I'm not familiar with Morbius as a character, like what his powers are. I think in a movie like this, where you have a superhero, or not a superhero, really just a character that the audience may not be crazy familiar with, it would be really helpful if you had that fun and games portion of the film where you see him figuring out what his powers are and what they do. And it would be very interesting because he is a doctor, he's a scientist. We've seen in the film that he likes to quantify things. He likes to use his watch to time things. He is a very science and medicine oriented person. So seeing someone with that background figure out their superpowers is very interesting, but instead we get this montage of him like looking tired and looking at his watch and drinking blood, and then like there are a few more things, and then he's like, oh yeah, and I discovered that I have echolocation. Like, that could be a really cool scene where someone is finding out and like discovering that they have echolocation, superhuman hearing, but instead the movie's just like, I have echolocation, I'm a bat. And it's boring. It's just so boring. It's not creative at all. There's so many things you could do with these characters that would make sense in the film, and instead the film's just like, whatever, he can do this. Moving on to stupid thing number 2, the constant ugly vampire faces. So vampires, you know, in Twilight, they're sexy. In this movie, they're not. Totally cool, totally fine. We love an ugly vampire, we do. But there is so much CGI ugly vampire face in this movie, and it's in this movie for no reason, or when it's in the movie, nobody reacts to it. So let me give you a scene as an example. So there's a big subway scene where Matt Smith and Jared Leto are fighting in a subway. They like meet after Jared Leto breaks out of prison. Matt Smith is like arguing with a guy who sells newspapers. Jared Leto finds him with echolocation and they beat each other up. There's a scene in a subway where they're beating each other up. We keep cutting to Matt Smith, and Matt Smith like has a CGI ugly vampire face on. And first of all, there was a huge fight on the subway, and none of the like literally breaking concrete, and none of the extras around even bat an eyelash. And then you see extras look at Matt Smith with his ugly vampire face on, and they just like look and walk away, which makes me think no one told the extras that they should be afraid of him, or that they should react in a certain way to him when they see him doing this. And it really takes you out of the world, because it feels like instead of seeing something that is scary, you're seeing something that you recognize as like, okay, that's weird looking, but it has no real stakes or consequences. There's also no established reason for why their faces change between normal face and scary vampire face. So it's also kind of done in the film in a way to where you're watching it and you're like, are they just kind of doing this because they like think it looks cool? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And you're supposed to get this impression from Jared Leto that he's holding the vampire back and that he can't control it, but there are several times where it cuts and his face is like total ugly scary vampire mode, and you're like, okay, like is this normal now? What? It's one of those little things where something as little as that, as like someone having a scary vampire face or not, you might think it doesn't matter, but it really does. There was a lot of stuff in this film that was just overlooked. It didn't feel like there was anyone who was ever on a consistent same page throughout the film, which is why I feel like a lot gets lost or disconnected, or a lot of the threads aren't fully pulled through. So another silly thing, like the nurse hallway thing, you cut to something scary, cut back to the nurse, she doesn't react like it was scary, even though clearly it was made to be very scary for the audience. And then another thing that is very stupid, the fourth stupid thing you could say, is there is a little bit of cursing in this film, like the S word and, you know, the D word and the H word, all of that. Not like the top tier curse words, but there's this moment where one of the police officers is talking about the blue blood to Morbius, and he's like, your blue blood saved my life in Afghanistan. But if you're watching his mouth, he very clearly says, your blue blood or your artificial blood saved my ass in Afghanistan. But there's been swearing in the film before, so why would they dub over that and do it so obviously? It's not the biggest deal in the world. Things happen, you dub them, but when it's blown up on such a huge scale, it's very obvious, and especially when they want to change one teeny minor word, it's just a little like, okay, like why? And then, oh my gosh, fifth stupid thing, an action starts and then it goes slow motion and then it resumes in normal speed, and I hate that. It can be done cool. Like there are some movies where they do that in a cool way. I do think that the Snyder Cut of
Justice League
handled that very well, but it's not my favorite thing to see consistently. It does get old after a while, but when the scene calls for it, like when you have someone like Flash who actually can kind of go through time in a certain way or experiences time differently, those things make sense. Or when you have like just a really cool action shot and you want to like see all these intricacies taking place in a way to where you would have otherwise missed it if it was happening at normal speed. I get that, that's totally fine. But in this movie, someone jumps off a building and it goes normal speed, slow-mo, normal speed. And they like, you know, kind of pose in the air. But I don't care. It feels like the slow-mo is put in to be like, can you believe how cool this is? Look at this cool shot. And the shots are not cool. They're boring. They're dumb. It's someone jumping off a building with like their claw out and looking all ugly with their vampire face on. I didn't understand why it was in the movie, and it happened a bunch in the beginning when Morbius was just figuring out his powers, and then it was left for like the whole movie, and then it came back again towards the end. I mean, if you're gonna go for it, go for it. But if you're not gonna go for it, just take it out, because who cares? Oh my gosh, one of the stupidest things in this film, or something that I personally found very funny, is when Morbius is in jail and he's talking to the two cops. They're, you know, doing their interrogation, like, where were you on the container ship? Where are they? That sort of thing. Morbius, he gets hungry and he like has these convulsions, and this is another time where his face like flips between normal face and vampire face, and the cops don't even bat an eyelash at him. They're just like, and Morbius is like, blah, 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 blah. And then the cops are like, are you okay? And Morbius is like, I'm hungry and you don't like me when I'm hungry. It had very like, you don't like me when I haven't had my coffee, or like, don't talk to me until I've had my coffee energy. Something that points to poor direction to me is a little thing that could really slip under the radar, but really shows that the director didn't really grasp the material, is the nurse versus doctor. So I mentioned this a while ago in the review, but the doctor lady, Martine, she has a moment in the cargo ship where kind of a guy, sort of a douchey guy, comes over to her and he's like, you're Morbius's nurse, right? And she's like, no, I'm a doctor. And she gets some flack for that. The guy's like, oh yeah, right, you're just a woman, you blah, blah, blah. And then later on, when she's in the hospital, the cops come in and the cops are like, you were his nurse, right? And she doesn't correct them. She just like looks at them. And I feel like we were given an idea of her character in the cargo ship where she will fight back. And like, cool, I like that. But then when the cops, who are not portrayed to be threatening at all, come into the hospital, she doesn't correct them. Her only motivation to be afraid of the cops is that if she gives them information, they're gonna go after Morbius. You can have it in the movie where like someone is afraid of a police officer just because the police officer is a police officer. But the way that the police presence is portrayed and the way that she's kind of portrayed in relation to it, it just, there's no other way that the scene can play other than like, it just was directed poorly. Let me remind you, this doctor was in a situation on a cargo ship where she was the only woman and she didn't know where her friend was, and she still corrected a guy who had literally a big gun, and she was like, actually, it's Dr. to you. So that just really kind of bugged me. It's just those little things that you can kind of shoot for the stars on the big stuff and you can miss, but when a lot of those little things start to go wrong and start to crumble, for me that's when it kind of points to like, okay, there is just some oversight on this. Like, you can have action scenes that are directed poorly or really difficult to follow, which this has. But when you have little things like that, doesn't point to the best direction or the best people in charge who can really give this movie some consistency. So there was that, and then another stupid thing, there are a lot of ugly shots in this movie. There is a lot of debris, and there is a lot of particle shots, and the fight scenes just look bad. They're just not compelling, and they happen at set pieces or settings where it's nothing new. There's a big fight in a subway tunnel, kind of the lobby where there are a lot of people going in and out. I've seen movies with fights and chases in subway stations a lot, and I've seen them done a lot better than this. And this one was just very boring, and Matt Smith, it kept cutting to like the ugly vampire face, the extras weren't reacting to it. It was just very jumbled and very messy. And then the worst action scene, the ugliest one, is like the big final battle scene where Morbius and whatever, Matt Smith, are fighting. And they I think they jump off like a really high building, and they are falling, and they keep going through things, and there are a lot of explosions and stuff, but you only see the explosion, or you only see the debris from the explosion. So it's like a full mat or mask over the screen of just explosions or particles or debris. And for me, when I watch that, I think, okay, well, they didn't have enough footage to cut in a way to where it was very consistent from kind of the top of the fight to the bottom of the fight, what was going on. Or maybe this is what they set out to do, but it just was not working. It was very hard to know where the actors were in relation to each other. It was difficult to know where they were just in space, you know? And then when the whole screen is filled up with these shots of debris and explosions, there's a way that you can do that where it could be very stylistic, but in this case, it was not. I mean, it really looked like they had nothing else to cut to maybe bridge between a couple scenes or sequences, and they just used that. And it was very odd and awkward to watch and to look at. Another stupid thing, there's some great chemistry between the characters in this film, but there are not enough moments in the film that really develop those relationships. For example, we have Morbius and the lady doctor, and they have a great chemistry together. They really do. And I was rooting for them to get together eventually. Okay, they could make a cool couple. They're equally matched intellectually, and they're both attractive people, and they seem to have each other's backs. But I wasn't given enough moments with them that weren't just exposition dumps or plot dumps, and it made it very frustrating because I really enjoyed the scenes where it was just a couple characters together talking, but those got very lost, and it felt like they were treated only as a utility, like a tool, and not an actual scene that meant something. I felt myself really wishing for a scene that had the lady doctor, Morbius, and Matt Smith all in a room together. I think that sometimes having that third person in a room can really give you insight into how the couple dynamics work. So that could give the audience really good insight into the relationship between Matt Smith and Morbius and the lady doctor, and the lady doctor and Matt Smith. But it just kind of felt like the movie says, these people know these people, and this is what's happening. Okay, lightning round of stupid things. Jared Leto declining the Nobel Prize for literally no reason other than he's like, oh, the establishment never supported me. But they're literally giving you a Nobel Prize, and his lab needed the money. His lady doctor scientist even said so. And declining that prize doesn't seem to have any sort of consequence on him or his life or his relationship with the lady doctor. Another thing, Jared Leto almost lets the vampire bats eat the guys in Costa Rica, even though he took the Hippocratic Oath. Let me remind you, he's a doctor. Matt Smith's wealth is never explained, which I feel like it should be. It would be a fun little bit of information at least. And then the kiss/bite at the end was treated so awkwardly. It truly blew my mind and broke my brain as I was watching this movie, really truly. And I think those are all the stupid things for now. So all in all, I think the characters did do their best with the material that they were given. There were no performances that I thought were just outright duds. There were a couple performances that straight up didn't work for me, especially the two police officers. I just wish that they spent more time focusing on the characters and their relationships and not on big, ugly action scenes. I think that the script had a lot of holes. I think the edits were very confusing, especially when it came to what they chose to leave in and what they chose to very noticeably change, and there were things in this film too that I think the director really should have caught, and he didn't. And I think the end result really suffered. It's just kind of a mess. If it comes out later that this movie was a product of a lot of studio meddling, much like Justice League, then I'll be happy to eat my words. If the director comes out and is like, hey, it was really supposed to be this and all these things are supposed to be this way, I'd be like, okay, like, totally understand, but you know, it doesn't really change the fact that this movie is just not that fun to watch. And I think I was also pretty turned off by the you won't like me without my coffee energy. Unfortunately, I felt that permeate my being when I was watching this. Oh, well, I wonder how long we'll keep it in the theater.
Whew. So that is our review of Morbius. I hope you enjoyed. I'm sorry that I'm not feeling like myself again. I think that's bad again. And I know I said that I wouldn't take another sip, but I'm really starting to feel sick again. So for now, this will be us signing off. This movie seemed to have made a lot of money, so hopefully we'll be in the clear for the next few weeks until something exciting comes along that we actually like. So until we see you again, this is M from the Flea Pit signing off.